The Commanders' pass rush all but disappeared after Dorance Armstrong went down, and teams can't be consistently good when that happens. Because of that, setting a young foundation for the future of the team's pass rush has to be priority number one.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network. I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground, credentialed member of the media, covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, also writing for Commanders on SI, here with you 5 days a week. And coming up on today's episode, efficiency versus explosiveness in the running back free agent market and paying and repaying Laremy Tunsil. But first, sacks translate, and that's why pass rushers need to be the priority in the NFL draft. All that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The belief that sacks translate from the college game to the NFL is why, if painted into a corner, I'm targeting the NFL draft for new pass rushers. And in today's mailbag episode, I'm being painted into that corner because Ravi asks, of all the needs the team needs to fix, which position group would you target in free agency? Which group would you trade for if possible? And which group would you draft? And so to answer that question, the draft target, we're going to draft pass rush because, like I said, sacks typically translate from the college game to the NFL. It's hard to be bad when you're good in the trenches, as Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks always say, and I believe in that saying. And so we're going to go with that because you can set a young foundation there that can help you for years. Free agency, we're going to target the running back position because even if a guy like Breece Hall gets tagged, there's money and there's options to attack the running back market confidently, and then paint it into the corner. We're then drafting, or we're then trading rather, for a wide receiver, maybe a Jaylen Waddle, maybe a Brian Thomas Jr. But of course, that's just how we're going to start this mailbag episode. We've also got Merle coming through. Do Commanders have to use their first pick on an edge rusher? And then Joy coming through. Realistically speaking, what are we going to do about our O-line and getting some players that will get better at protecting Jayden Daniels? So let's start with we just answered the pillars. We just answered the strategy question from Ravi, right? And obviously that's being painted into a corner. Things are going to change this entire conversation all through the offseason, which is what makes it so fun, because truthfully, we can have kind of the same conversation, but we have it in different lenses every time something changes with this Washington Commanders team through a signing, or sometimes even through a signing that somebody else makes that takes a player off the board that maybe we wanted for the Washington Commanders, things like that. But I do want to get to this offensive line question because this is something that I've heard from other people as well, and I've heard conversations about this as well. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Washington Commanders have like the most dominant offensive line in the National Football League, but their offensive line was actually one of the better ones in the league. I think we all saw during the season in 2025 that, for one, the rushing attack, the running game for the offense was able to be incredibly productive and consistently so when used. I think most of us would agree, and not everybody, and that's okay, but most of us would agree that the biggest problem with the running game in 2025 is that it wasn't used enough, or at least used consistently enough. I always go back to that very, very painful experience watching the Washington Commanders get shut out against the Minnesota Vikings, where the very first possession of the game for the Commanders, you're already down 7-0, and Chris Rodriguez Jr. is averaging over 8 yards per carry, over 7 yards per carry on that first drive. You get down to first and goal from the 6. Chris Rodriguez Jr. gains you 3 yards on first and goal. Now you need 3 more yards. You got 3 downs to get 3 more yards, which Chris just got you on first down because of that offensive line push and because of what they've been doing that entire drive. And inexplicably, the Washington Commanders offense goes past three plays in a row. I don't even necessarily mind the one pass attempt on second down. It's like, hey, we've been cramming the ball down their throat. They're probably going to sell out for the run. Let's try to dupe them into a play action, get an offensive lineman open in the back in the end zone for an easy touchdown. You tried it. It didn't work. The defense was smarter than the average bear. Fine. You've got 2 more plays to get those 3 yards. Pound the rock, right? Run the ball in. Instead, the Washington Commanders stay cute. They didn't just get cute on second down. They stayed cute. Try to get those passing yards, that passing touchdown for Jayden Daniels. I don't know if it was Jayden Daniels specific, but they try to get that, touchdown through the air. They end up turning the ball over on downs. The Minnesota Vikings go 98 yards, score another touchdown, and pretty much, that's basically the end of the game at that point in time. Later on, obviously, Jaden re-injures his elbow, and that's all she wrote. So I think it's more of a usage thing than anything. So from a run game approach, obviously the offensive line at least satisfactory, right? Again, I'm not going to tell you that the offensive line in Washington last year was the best in the entire league, the best we've ever seen, on par with the Hogs, things like that. Don't want to get hyperbolic here, but a solid unit in the passing game as well. The Washington Commanders had a top 10 offensive line in pass blocking efficiency in 2025, one of the better offensive lines in the NFL in protecting the quarterbacks. They were credited with 19 sacks, which did rank middle of the league. However, they only allowed 137 pressures, which was third fewest in the league. So Washington Commanders quarterbacks pressured the third fewest of any other team's quarterbacks in the NFL. And you have to put it that way, obviously, because the Washington Commanders played with multiple quarterbacks, 3 of them to be exact. And sometimes sacks, sometimes they're due to quarterbacks. They're due to quarterbacks holding the ball too long. They're due to receivers not coming open. And it's not just on quarterbacks. Some of that's on scheme, and there's all types of different things. But when you actually get to, did the offensive line give up quick pressures? Did the offensive line give up a sack to where the quarterback just didn't have time to hit the back of their drop? Things like that. The Washington Commanders offensive line did pretty stinking well. In fact, I remember there were several games at that Dallas Cowboys game, actually, I remember very specifically, like where Jaden Daniels just had time. Just couldn't find anybody open, or when there was somebody open, he didn't see him. And again, it's a conglomerate of things. It's a lot of things, but the offensive line overall wasn't terrible. Brandon Coleman, moved from left guard to left tackle once Laremy Tunsil got injured. Right now, obviously, I'm going to have him penciled in as a starting left guard, but we'll see what happens with Chris Paul's contract, see what happens with the draft, all those things before we center that. Center Tyler Biadasz has been a very, very consistent mainstay as a communicator of the offensive line, setting the protections. Maybe hasn't been the greatest blocking center in the NFL, but he's been very good in the other areas that are very, very critical to the position. Sam Cosmi started looking more and more like himself until he suffered that injury at the end of the season that cost him the rest of his year. Good news about that is it's not a long-term issue. And then Josh Connolly Jr. obviously started off pretty rough as a rookie right tackle, moving over from playing left tackle in college and all that stuff, but got better as the year went on, and we'll see what he does in year 2. So again, I think the offensive line is actually pretty solid. I don't know that it needs any major upgrades. I think that left guard position certainly is probably the biggest question mark entering the offseason. But I don't know that any drastic needs or drastic swings need to be taken there. And then you got depth too. I think Andrew Wiley, it's at least possible that he comes back to be a veteran, swing tackle option, things like that. We'll see again with Brandon Coleman. He might be a depth guy again. Tim McKay is someone that you didn't hear a lot about last year, but he's a undrafted free agent because of the injury that he suffered during the draft process that, the team is very high on. So we'll see what he has in year 2 as well. And then as far as Merle and Ravi kind of both talking about pass rusher, Merle, the best way I can answer your question as far as what is the number one option or when the number one need in the NFL draft right now is based on the roster right now. So again, like a lot of these conversations, this conversation is going to change as we go through the offseason. But yeah, right now, pass rusher has to be the number one, target. And look, that doesn't necessarily have to be an edge rusher. Ruben Bain Jr. out of Miami is someone that a lot of people see reducing inside as a pass rusher. Certainly you could make a case for him there, though I think from a asset commitment standpoint, unless you've traded, somebody from the interior defensive line group to get more draft picks, that's kind of overcrowding an area a little bit. Arvell Reese out of Ohio State, versatile linebacker, who can play outside, he can play off ball, he can do a lot of different things, and as a pass rusher, so don't necessarily have to go edge to address the pass rush. David Bailey, obviously out of Texas Tech, is a popular name. TJ Parker out of Clemson is a popular name, and a lot of people think that this is the edge group. If you need edge help, if you need pass rushing help, go after it twice in this group. Go get 2 guys to set that foundation, which is why, going back to that first question from Ravi, I lean on the draft for the pass rush help while we go elsewhere for the other areas of need in this Washington Commanders roster. Now, kicking the can down the road on expensive free agent contracts and re-signings is basically the NFL way. Adam Peters is likely preparing to do that right now with Laremy Tunsil, so we'll dive into what that could look like coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or any of the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or even connect online. Then they will handle everything from your W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction possible. And you can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It is a huge time saver and gives you real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling your taxes. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day today and every day to the everydayers, those of you who come through for every single episode. Special thank you goes out to you for coming through for yet another one here today. If you're new to the program, just finding us this offseason, welcome to the show. We are 5 days a week all throughout the offseason, so make sure you come back again real soon. And if you haven't heard of the Everydayer Club or checked out the Everydayer Club, highly recommend that you do. LockedOnCommanders.supercast.com is the website to go to check out the Everydayer Club. You got 2 tiers: membership tier, which includes ad-free versions of these episodes, and you got the all access tier, which includes everything in the membership tier plus more, including a daily newsletter and your ability to send me your text messages, which is how we get these questions for these mailbag episodes. Moving on with our mailbag episode from our questions here from our insiders and our all access members of the Everydayer Club. Laremy Tunsil, we got a follow-up question from Merle. It's actually a pretty good trend in this mailbag, is multiple questions from a few of you instead of an individual questions from a lot of you. So a little bit of a different kind of tone to this one. But Laremy Tunsil expected to have a new contract this offseason. That's not new news or new information or a new take. That's pretty much been the expectation, since before the offseason even arrived, that Laremy would be getting a new contract from the Washington Commanders. So Merle wants to know, how is Adam Peters going to handle the Laremy Tunsil contract extension, and how is it going to affect the free agent outlook for the Washington Commanders? And I think how it's going to affect the free agency outlook, Merle, is it's going to open up the door. It's going to open up the spending. Adam Peters is likely going to free up money this offseason in the 2026 salary cap to go out there and spend potentially even more money. So again, I can't guarantee you that everything is going to be a big swing, but we've heard, other national people say they expect fireworks from the Washington Commanders. I think all of us expect them to be a little bit aggressive, at least in some areas. I don't know that I expect them to get into like massive bidding wars for guys like Alec Pierce, and if Breece Hall hits the open market and that becomes a bidding war. I don't know if Adam Peters is ever going to get into this mode where he's willing to just kind of overpay for guys. He already mentioned at the end of season press conference that he's not really keen on doing multi-year deals and overpaying for guys they don't know. So obviously connections with people is important, but connections in the league are a little bit weird. Doesn't mean that, it's a former 49er or whatever. It could be, just I know a guy who knows a guy who knows this guy, and I trust the links between type of thing. So that being said, the Laremy Tunsil deal, should it go down the way we expect it to go down, and I put it that way because I don't know what the terms of any conversations have been or are, it's actually going to free up money for the Washington Commanders and open up the door for them to be more aggressive in 2026 if they want to. So Laremy Tunsil's current deal that he arrived with the Washington Commanders from the Houston Texans with expires after 2026. Now, it's not in the exact same way that he arrived, because when he arrived, the cap hit in 2025 was actually bigger than it was than it ended up being. The Washington Commanders reworked his deal just like they reworked Deebo Samuel's deal to lower the cap hit in 2025, which makes the cap hit in 2026 $24.9 million, roughly 10% of the salary cap. Not quite 10%, but almost 10% of the salary cap. It includes 3 void years, which are 2027, 8, and 9. So if Laremy Tunsil were to not be under contract next offseason, similar to what Deebo Samuel just but what just happened in Deebo Samuel's contract here last week, then that would void, and it would be $10.8 million in dead cap against the 2027 salary cap, which equals out to $35.7 million against salary cap over the next 2 years, only one of which you actually have him under contract to play for your team. So what we're going to expect to have happen is that the Washington Commanders are going to do what they did in 2025, and they're going to push the accounting down the road a little bit. It's important to understand the difference between accounting and real money, because when you tell you that the Washington Commanders took Laremy Tunsil's cap hit in 2025 and shrunk it down to $6 million, they didn't shrink the amount of money Laremy Tunsil earns. They just moved the way they accounted for the books. It's much more of a forensic thing than it is an actual cash payout thing, as are all these deals, right? So ideally, Laremy Tunsil is going to want to reset the market. That's kind of just the expectation here. He's a pretty consistent Pro Bowl caliber left tackle. Left tackle for right-handed quarterback is the most important player on the field. And, for Jaden Daniels, he kind of proved to be that as well. The new 3-year extension, which would be 4 years total. So you're tacking 3 years onto 2026. He's already under contract for 2026. You're talking about tacking on 3 more years. You have to account for all that dead money in there. You're probably talking about $90 million in new money, roughly speaking, about $30 million APY. I think the expectation is anywhere from $28 to $30 million APY. So if we go high end here, $30 million annual per year of new money on his new contract. Guarantee is probably going to sit somewhere around $65 million at signing, which means once he signs that contract, he's making $65 million no matter what happens. Everything else will be incentives based. But that $65 million would basically cover 26 and 2027, which means for the Washington Commanders, that's kind of the trade-off here. Laremy Tunsil gets a lot of guaranteed money up front, gets a big chunk of change. The Washington Commanders have some cap flexibility later on in the contract. So if 2028, offseason comes around and they need to get out of that deal, they'll have the flexibility and the ability to do so. The signing bonus, you're probably looking at about $40 million of it being signing bonus. Spread that over 5 years, including 1 void year in 2030. And what you're looking at is, say, 2026, roughly, you're looking at about a $13.5 million cap hit. So you actually lower his cap hit from $24.9 million to $13.5. So that's roughly, about $11 million, a little bit less than $11 million, about $10 million cap bonus for the Washington Commanders. You gain about $10 million in cap space. And, for some of our previous conversations, we've talked about the potential of the Washington Commanders going out there and adding Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk is estimated to make about $10 to $12 million against salary cap. And if you're the Washington Commanders, you make this deal with Laremy Tunsil, you go get Brandon Aiyuk for $10 to $12 million. That's going to be pretty much all incentives based, if not at least a large portion of it incentive based, all of it incentives based. And you're basically using the money you just saved from the Laremy Tunsil extension against the salary cap to do the Brandon Aiyuk thing. And now, in that lens, when you look at it that way, it basically becomes a zero risk prospect. You have Laremy Tunsil under contract for this much of your cap hit, and you still have top 10 cap numbers. Now, you basically keep your salary cap at the exact same place it was before, but you add Brandon Aiyuk, a potential number 2 wide receiver, to your roster. So those are kind of the way that some of those things can be viewed. Now, in cash, right? So $13.5 million against the cap. What's actually going to happen in cash is Laremy Tunsil is going to get handed about $42 million in actual cash in 2026. So that's, again, the difference between the cash money and the accounting that the salary cap has. Then in 2027, you'd be looking at another cap hit of about $30.5 million with an increase in the salary cap. Again, that's not going to be near as much as it would be in, say, today's salary cap. You could also, again, if you need to, tack on another void year, move that money down the line if you need it. And then, you're looking at 2028, you're talking about bigger cap hits, but you're also looking at less guaranteed money, which means less dead money if you decide that you need to move on from Laremy. So that's just kind of an idea. Again, don't quote those numbers. I'm not telling you those numbers or what the contract's going to be. It's just kind of to give you an idea of what I think the Washington Commanders are looking at when it comes to Laremy Tunsil. And again, the impact on free agency is that it opens up the door for more money to be spent. And again, like I said, you can basically extend Laremy Tunsil, bring in Brandon Aiyuk, and your salary cap situation doesn't change at all. That's a pretty good operation. If you ask me, explosive ability is important in free agents. However, efficiency can be more important in free agents. So is Rachaad White a better target for the Washington Commanders than Breece Hall? That question might surprise you, or the answer to that question might surprise you. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by FanDuel. If you've ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person, FanDuel is giving you a chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it is going to work. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you're going to automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. You get flight tickets, the whole experience. So if you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures. I've actually got a future that's on the board right now. I picked the Seattle Seahawks to win the Super Bowl at the beginning of the NFL postseason, and then I added the Ohio State Buckeyes football team to win the NCAA college football championship in the 2026 season. So I've got to wait a while for that futures bet to hit, but if it hits, it's going to pay out a good amount. Now, in this situation, it needs to be an NBA future, so you go place that futures down, and not only can you get some cash, but you could also get a trip to the NBA Finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Is Deebo Samuel really leaving, and is Rachaad White possibly a better target for the Washington Commanders than Breece Hall? Those are the two questions we're going to wrap up this mailbag episode with. Joy coming through asking about Deebo. Cam coming through basically said, tell me why Rachaad White is better than Breece Hall. And that's a challenge that I said, okay, you know what? I'm gonna accept that challenge. I'm gonna take it. It kind of takes you back to like debate class. If you ever had a debate class, like this is your angle, whether you agree with it or not, this is your angle. Take this angle and give me an explanation. Now, as far as Deebo Samuel leaving, listen, I can't tell you right now if Deebo Samuel's leaving. I don't have contact with Deebo's agent right now on his contract situation. I don't have contact with the team. The team has been obviously very tight-lipped ever since this new regime came in, which, again, doesn't help me do my job and give you as many headlines as you want, but I think it's the best way for them to operate, so I can't really hate. I'm not going to cast, shade on them for doing so. I think it's the best way to run their business is the way that they're doing it. However, I will say this. The vibe I get from some of the conversations I'm having is that, yeah, I think there's a very good chance that Deebo is not going to return in 2026. And I think it's something, I don't remember the number right off the top of my head anymore, but it's something right around like 20%, like less than 20% of players who have void years hit dead cap space actually end up re-signing with that team. And that includes the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have been re-signing void year dead cap players at a clip of like 60% lately. So that obviously is going to inflate the number for the entire league. But even still with that, the number is below 20%. So if you take the Buccaneers out of it, you're talking less than 15%, 12% of players outside the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization, where if they have a void year contract hit and become dead cap, they don't usually re-sign with their team. So I don't know that I would expect Deebo Samuel back. As far as, is Rachaad White a better target for the Washington Commanders than Breece Hall? I think when you have this conversation, and if you want to take the mantle of Rachaad White being a better option for the Washington Commanders over Breece Hall, then you have to look at, one, how much the salary cap each guy is going to take, and two, what is it you're looking for? And for the Washington Commanders, if you have Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt on the roster, which they do, if you bring back Chris Rodriguez Jr., which we expect them to, then you have basically your top two backs from last year. And we've seen both those guys be very effective in the roles that they carry for the Washington Commanders, where neither back was necessarily relied on a whole lot, was on third downs. Now, again, I've made the case that I think both guys can catch better than they're given credit for. I think Chris Rodriguez Jr. is a better pass blocker than maybe he's given credit for. But the way that it looks on the surface is that the Washington Commanders need a third down back that can reliably pass block and reliably be a pass catcher on those third downs. So if you're looking at Rachaad White and Breece Hall through the lens of, we need to make sure we add third down competency above all else, then I think that's where you make the case for Rachaad White to maybe be the better target, because one, he's expected to be less expensive against the salary cap. And we know the Commanders have plenty of cap space, but that could still obviously play an impact. When you look at just say 2025, their most recent, right, what have you done for me lately type of stats, Rachaad White has an 88.9% catch rate, catching 40 catches on 45 targets, while Breece Hall, 75% catch rate, 36 catches on 48 targets. And in 2024, Rachaad White even led the Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield, who was number one in fantasy points. And listen, fantasy points and reality and all that stuff don't always marry up, but he did have 64 catches for 549 yards out of the backfield. Rachaad White, it's something he's been doing since college. It's something that, Breece Hall certainly, I think, does fairly well as well in the NFL. And when you look at the explosive side of it, that's where you then flip the coin back over to Breece Hall, because he's averaging his yards per reception 9.7 yards, while Rachaad White is averaging 5.5 yards. Now, Breece Hall had 9 catches of 20-plus yards. Rachaad White didn't have a single one. So do you want the lower catch rate but the higher explosive rate, or do you want the more consistent? Do we want to just know when I throw the ball, this dude's probably going to bring this in and get me some yards? that's kind of the debate you need to have. And then you also have the price point, the dollar point, right? And obviously, I think most people would say that Breece Hall, just given what he's been able to do with the New York Jets, being their primary and oftentimes their only back, versus Rachaad White, who obviously ended up taking a backseat to Bucky Irving as a primary back in Tampa. That's going to be part of the conversation. But if you're asking me to tell you where Rachaad White is a better option for the Washington Commanders this offseason than Breece Hall, it's the price tag combined with the pass catching efficiency, the consistency that you're going to get out of there compared to the explosive ability compared to there. So again, if you define better pass catcher, fewer drops, more polished pass route or route tree, and even evidence to support that Rachaad White is a better pass blocker, there is a case to be made there, relative to the cost and all those things. So very interesting mailbag. I like the challenges very much. So I appreciate all of you for coming through for that. We've actually got so many questions that we can't actually get through them all in one episode. So we've got a bonus mailbag episode coming up here very shortly on Locked On Commanders. That's going to do it for this one. So make sure you are subscribed, following along with Locked On Commanders so you get the next one and everything else coming on the program. And if you never missed an episode of Locked On Commanders in the Everydayer Club, literally built for you, LockedOnCommanders.supercast.com to check that out. And make sure for your next listen of the day, you check out the Locked On NFL podcast twice per day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. You're getting a double dose of NFL news and analysis. And to the Everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every single day. And I thank you again for coming through today. So everybody out there, thank you for coming through. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And until next time, please stay safe. Be kind to one another. We will talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On podcast network, your team every day.